Elise, happy
What's
Friday.
going on?
Hope you're having a good day.
It's been good so far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy to hear that. So, Elise, I'd like to proudly introduce you to my doctor, Dr. Binning. I met Dr. Binning, a year ago ish, and the man's changed my life. All you have to do is shut up and listen, and you're going to learn a lot of cool stuff. I met Dr. Binning. I was having a lot of health problems. The biggest one, or the biggest factor that we were able to work on, was inflammation in my body. I had no idea how inflamed I was. I had no idea it could cause the kind of health concerns that I had and have currently. And he's been so easy to work with, so easy to learn from, so easy to open up to and tell. He's almost like a shrink at the same time. I don't know. He does probably doesn't want that, but uh, he's my bro. We kind of level with each other a lot. He's been great for me as a business owner as well to help me navigate through the COVID times as well. He's helped me recover the sight in my right eye that I lost and be released from eye doctor's care, which I'm one of the only people in Canada to ever come back from that. So I'm told. And I owe all that to Dr. Pinning. And he's gonna, if you work with him, he's gonna present you with some things that might seem difficult, but that's like anything in life. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. So nothing's easy, but the biggest thing is being consistent and committing to it. And at least that's what you're all about. You've changed your whole life, and we marvel at you, how well you're doing and how consistent you are. I don't think working with Dr. Binnings, I don't think it'll be alarming to you what he would ask you to do and how well it could work for you. So that's kind of my spiel. I'm excited to listen and learn tonight as well. So I'll pass it back to the doctor.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for that very nice introduction. And thanks also for, wanting to set up this opportunity for your community because we see the need, right? And
Yeah.
also, I want to say thanks for being willing to do an important thing, which is to step into your own greatness. And you're a perfect example of when someone hears that something's impossible, they make movement from impossible to I'm possible, right? And that's pretty much the first step is you have to ignore anyone who says you can't do something and focus and surround yourself with people that say it's totally possible. So as we go through this, I have some specific goals that I want to achieve on this call. And
Okay.
one is to kind of pull back the curtain on what we think is happening around us, what's really happening in society, and what's the state of our healthcare. Okay, so then I'll take you through a bit of my story, and we're going to do a case study and kind of see how this all comes together in a real life case. And now, Chris, you're nice enough to share some of the things we were able to achieve with you, but I'm going to use someone else's case study because I had a feeling you were going to share your story. Um, so here's the thing. One of the things we want to talk about is how we live in a society that's full of contradictions, right? And one of the things that we see is this idea that, our healthcare system is the best it's ever been, right? And if it's the best it's ever been, the problem that we're seeing is it doesn't reflect in the level of health we're seeing in our public, right? We have the statistics now are that 50% of adults, but now also children, are suffering with at least one chronic disease. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is all this technology delivering for us? Right? It's not making people healthier because if you follow that stat, that's never been the case before in history. Right? So we're getting worse. And so you hear comments. I remember taking my wife to an appointment at a hospital, and there's like this big sign, investing in our community, and we're building 15 floors or something like that. And the thought came to me, and I was thinking, how is this a sign that we're investing in our community? all we're planning for when we're putting money into that is we're planning on more people getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A true investment in our community would be investing in the education of our community, so we don't all have to end up in that waiting room. Right? And so this is kind of the trajectory that I see we have to move in. And how is that going to be achieved? Through educating people about how to obtain health and where to develop it. More importantly, is it has to be in their own home, right? Nobody gets healthy by walking into a doctor's office. We get healthy by changing things when we go home. And if we don't make those changes, nothing changes, right? So I'm going to share some of my story. And believe it or not, my story sheds light on one of the darkest secrets of healthcare. And that is that the person you're working with, we assume they're healthier than us, right? And my story highlights how this is rarely the case, right? I imagine spending 8 years in school in healthcare, coming out and feeling like you have no control over your life. So my life looked like this. So I would wake up every morning and have to choose whether I would eat or not. And I knew that if I chose to eat, then throughout the rest of the day, I'd be consciously thinking about how close am I to the bathroom? Because at any given moment, I knew that if I was too far, I wouldn't make it to there so I could perch on top of that porcelain throne like a gargoyle. And if I didn't make it, you can imagine the type of mess I would be in, right? And so that was something that was impacting my life immensely, to the point where I basically stopped eating. And then I started to have these bouts of fatigue that, were sporadic at the beginning, and then it was a daily occurrence. And it was so impactful that every day I would lock my office after I would eat, and I would lie on a couch. I actually bought a couch just to lie on. That's what this picture reminded me of when I saw it, so that I could sleep for an hour, because I was hiding all these things, right? And this is what happens in healthcare. And we have to start rethinking how we interact and what are we trying to achieve. Because if someone was coming to me for fatigue, I probably wasn't in the position where I could help them, because there was nothing I was doing that I could help myself with, right? And so being in that place, what I recognize in my own journey is that you oftentimes don't notice how far you've gone, right? Or how far you've let things fall in terms of your health, because I thought I was functioning relatively well. And that probably has to do with most of the people around me at that time felt similar, right? But this wasn't being healthy. And I wasn't able to make certain changes, not because I wasn't looking for them. I was trying everything to get my energy back and to get my gut sorted out. I went to doctors. I tried, all the things that you were supposed to, but nothing was clicking, nothing was working. And I was getting no answers as to why it wouldn't work. And so the frustration I was feeling was immense. And what my life started to feel like was that I was constantly lost, confused, tired of trying new things, and mostly embarrassed, right? Embarrassed that this was my life and I'm in healthcare. And so everything I did was to hide it from anyone seeing or noticing that my life was kind of upside down, right? But here's the thing, everything changes when you have a reason. And so that reason I call my why. And my why came to me the very day my wife told me that she might be pregnant with our first child. And so this is my family. Here's my oldest girl, Sienna. And I always tell her she saved me without even being born. But the idea of her saved me. And I remember when my wife told me, I went to the pharmacy and got her a pregnancy kit. And I was driving back to the house. And it was like a voice in my head that said, what are you going to do to make sure that this child is born healthy, lives a healthy life, and also that your wife goes through this process and comes out the other side feeling healthy? And, I remember driving and almost looking at my eyes in the rearview mirror, and the answer that I got was nothing. I couldn't do anything because I didn't have that myself. And so all of a sudden, I had a reason that was bigger than me, because this is how human nature is we get comfortable in our own suffering. And we're really good at lying to ourselves. So every day I was lying to myself saying, no, I'm in healthcare. I'm a healthy person. Right. But at this moment in time, I had to face the reality of how sick I was. And that if I didn't change this, I would likely give my daughter, I didn't know I was having a girl at that time, but my child at the same struggles that I was going through. Right. And so as looking at your responsibility as a parent, it became really evident that if I didn't fix this, I would never pass on the tools for my children to not end up where I was. And so it became utmost importance. And within a day, I reached out to a friend who was in functional medicine. And I hired him, we started working with each other. And similar to Chris's story, within 3 months, I had my life back. I was eating all the time. I had no more gut issues. My energy was back. I felt like me. And most importantly, I felt like I was becoming the father that I wanted to be. I felt like I was becoming the person that I would be proud of, and leaving a legacy that also was something I would be proud of. And so we all need this why. Sometimes that's the thing that gets you to take action. And my advice is we have to dig deep and find something that's often bigger than ourselves. So now we can talk about what functional medicine is versus conventional medicine. And so what I'm going to do is just highlight some of the differences. Okay. And this might sound like these things are very similar, but I'll show how they're not. So with functional medicine, what it is science-based, but it's cutting edge of the kind of science frontier, meaning that what's happening in the research, you're constantly reading and applying in real time, right? It's patient-centered, meaning that what we're always trying to do is work with the individual, not the labels they've been given, but the person sitting in front of you. It's the solutions are all about resolving the root cause. So that means you can't just run a lab test and say, this is why you're sick. What you always have to do is ask the question, why? I'll give you a good example. If someone's low on iron, right, or is tired and lethargic, and they run a blood test and they find out they're low on iron, then what's the natural solution someone's going to give them is say, hey, I know why you're low energy is you're deficient in iron, so you need to take iron. But in functional medicine, if we do this correctly and we go through that scenario, the solution wouldn't necessarily be that they need iron. What would happen is we raise another question. Why is this person low on iron? Especially if they're taking iron supplements or eating a diet that's rich in iron, then that wouldn't make sense that, oh, that's your reason for being low energy. What we have now is another problem that we have to solve. Okay. Functional medicine is focused on prevention and is very holistic. Whereas conventional medicine is still relatively science-based. But here's the problem, is the science that's trickling down into your doctor's office often is 20 years behind what's happening in research. And so I remember when I started changing and researching things, simple things like gluten, and my family doctor was like, what are you talking about? That doesn't matter. You're not a celiac. It's not going to be a problem for you. Whereas now the same person, and this is 16 years ago, is telling me how important it is, right? So how many people suffer in that lag, right? That 20-year gap before it kind of gets into the doctor's office, right? And that's kind of the big issue. And conventional medicine is very disease-centered. So here's the thing. Why do so many people suffer with symptoms chronically? Whereas when they're going to their doctors, they're getting testing done, and although they're suffering, they're being told they're normal. And the reason why this happens is because the system is set up that you can only be worked on or treated or helped if you have a disease that they can label you with. And so what that means is you're not normal. It means come back when you're sicker. We can give you a label. Now we can take some action. And the action isn't about curing you. It's about managing your problem, right? So that's what happens when you start in a disease-centered model rather than a patient-centered model. And the outcomes are always about managing symptoms. And we hear that all the time, the word managing. It's kind of my pet peeve when people say, I'm managing my diabetes. What does that really mean? You're staying a diabetic, right? You're not improving. And then conventional medicine is always reactive, right? So like I said, you have to get a disease, then we're going to react to it. And the system is very fragmented, and we've all been through this. I know I have, where you might see a gastroenterologist who doesn't even talk to your family doctor, and then they send you to a neurologist. No one's talking to each other. And so none of the information, none of the dots get connected, right? And that's the difference with functional medicine is it's an approach that finally connects all these different dots to create a story about who you are as an individual and how to get you better. Now, this image here helps me explain functional medicine really quickly. What you see in the sky around this tree are different labels, different conditions. So you see autoimmune diseases, diabetes, cancer, depression, arthritis, obesity, fibromyalgia, hypothyroidism. And in the current system, you have to get one of these labels and then follow a protocol, right? A pre-drafted set of rules or steps that your doctor is going to follow. And in functional medicine, we don't care about this stuff so much. What we care about is what's going on in the soil, because these are the root causes of why someone might be sick. So what we want to look into is like, how much inflammation does someone have? What's driving it? What immune imbalances are there? Is the person have poor digestion? Are there hormonal imbalances? How much stress do they have? What nutrient deficiencies are there? Toxic emotions from someone's past or from someone's trauma? Is there mitochondrial dysfunction? How many toxins are they taking in from their environment? These are the things that we want to understand about each person so that we can then start looking at what is the unique combination that applies to that one person's life. And then we can change these things. And when you do improve what's going on here, the tree is going to grow better. The leaves are going to be greener and these things disappear, right? So now I'll ask this question, and I think everyone can speak on this, but it's a really simple question. What do you think the word doctor means?
Do you want me to go?
Sure.
To teach.
You've hung around me for a while. Yes, to teach. So here's the thing. Most people go to their doctor thinking that that's the person who's going to heal them. But the word doctor comes from Latin docere, which means to teach. And so we should really reflect on that and ask ourselves, when was the last time I learned something about my health that came from that office visit? And usually there's not a lot, right? There's not a lot of time given to teach you, okay? But this is how functional medicine differs. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a case study where we can actually see how this difference presents itself and helps someone get their life back, okay? Okay, so in this case study, it was a patient of mine who was suffering with digestive complaints. And so he went from being lost, confused, in pain and hopeless to getting his energy back, getting happy and feeling amazing. So let me give you some background information on this. When it comes to digestive complaints, this is one of the most common complaints your doctor sees in the office. On average in the US, you have 60 to 70 million people affected by this. It accounts for 4.6 million hospitalizations per year. So this is something that's taking a big chunk of our resources up. You have 250,000 deaths per year. And with digestive symptoms, the things that make this difficult to tackle is often the symptoms are going to present in other organ systems. So you might have brain symptoms that are really the result of a gut issue. You might have skin issues that are really the result of a gut issue. And when it comes to the gut, it can often take decades to get a diagnosis, which we already know then. Doesn't mean you're going to get better, right? The false hope is that when you get a label, somehow you're going to have a solution. But most people who have gone up down this road find that they get a diagnosis, and usually the answer is, well, we can't treat that because we don't know anything about it. And so the most we can do is try to suppress your symptoms, shut your immune system off, or wait till you have another diagnosis, right? And so gut issues are often the gateway to many other illnesses, especially autoimmune conditions. When it comes to gut issues, the one thing we have to recognize is the root cause of most illnesses can be traced back to the gut. And so it's very important with every single patient. One of the things we do is investigate what is going on there so that we can take those things and manipulate them and see how it impacts their health outcomes. So I'll introduce you to a patient of mine, and these aren't his real pictures, but everything else is real. So Mr. C, who was a father, a husband, and an entrepreneur. Very busy guy, hard worker, and was suffering for 16 years with pain, cramping, chronic diarrhea, even had blood in his stool all the time. And essentially, it reminded me a lot of me, because this is some of the stuff that I was going through. So he had an issue with how often he was going and the urgency of it, right? And so he developed this fear around traveling. Now he had his business set up in Milton, and he was driving from Cambridge all the time. And one of the things he had the same fear that I did is, what do you do when you're on this long stretch of highway and this urgency kicks in, right? And so taking simple steps like driving to work became scary, okay? His energy crashed. And when his energy crashed, so did his motivation and his willingness to work in his own business and grow his business. He was just kind of going through the motions of life with no enthusiasm. Eventually got diagnosed with IBS, given a prescription which never changed anything for him. So his frustrations increased because he never got an answer or a solution. Well, this is one thing that he told us, is that 16 years ago, he was diagnosed with IBS, handed a prescription and sent on my way. With no direction or help, I wasn't doing well at all, with huge amounts of stress. I felt like my health was crumbling around me, nothing helped, and I had nowhere to turn. I continued to deal with the physical and mental pain day to day as it turned into normalcy. So here's what we did. So when he came to us, he was referred by a friend of his. And one of the things we mentioned when we talked to him is that we would listen to him and leave no stone unturned. So I'm going to walk you through the process. And in this, I'm going to teach you some of the things we taught him. So the first thing we did was we had to discover the uniqueness of this case and the individual. And how do we do that? Well, we review their history and we have a big conversation with them, right? And so there's an interesting statistic that was published about a year or maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. But this article was publishing or speaking about the length of time that someone goes into their doctor's office, and so they start speaking, telling their healthcare provider what's going on in their life, what's wrong with them. And so they were measuring that time up until where they're interrupted, right? And so, Chris, you might know this, but I'll let you guess. If you don't know this, just guess at what you think that time was. How much time on average is someone allotted to, express to tell their story?
I'd say on average a year.
So I mean, in that office visit.
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay. What would you think? What's a number you would guess from your own experience? How long do you get to speak before you're interrupted?
4 seconds.
Oh, okay. So that tells me your experience was worse than most, but the average is 13 seconds.
Wow.
Right? Which is crazy, because what are you supposed to say in that time?
Right.
Nothing. Right? And so the number one complaint that I see in people when they come into our office, when we actually first sit down with them, they'll often say that this feels like the first time anyone's ever listened to me. Because it is.
Wow.
Right? When we give them the time to tell their story, we can learn a lot, right? Because no one knows your life or you better than you do. right? Who am I to say, oh, this is what your problem is after 13 seconds of listening? Why this is the problems. These are the things that we have to change. So once we get that down, once we kind of go through your history, once we go through all the testing you've done in the past so that we can determine what was done appropriately or what was completely skipped, then we do our own testing. So the rule we have is we test, we don't guess. And so with this patient, we ran a stool test, DNA-based stool test that helped us look at their microbiome, the presence of any stealth infections, parasites, worms. We're able to look at if they were sensitive to gluten, if they had leaky gut, and how much inflammation they had, right? So some of the steps we did based off of that testing, even before we had them do the testing, was we changed some of the foods they were eating. So we cut out some of the foods that cause a lot of inflammation in most people, like gluten and dairy.
Thank you.
And we taught him how to stimulate his digestive tract to function. And so I'll share some of the reality on what we can do with gut function as opposed to what we're doing currently. Most people, if their gut's not working, the first thing we do is throw supplements at it. But we have to understand how the gut works. So when the gut is we have to understand one thing, that the gut works in a very ordered process. Think of it like a car wash. You would never go in a car wash backwards where the heater comes on first, the soap goes on last, right? Because that would be ridiculous. And the same thing happens with our gut. Our gut depends on each step being done completely before the next step takes over. And if any of these steps are skipped, it affects every step that comes after it. So one of the things we had him do, I won't go through every of the each of the 6 C's, but there's this thing we call the 6 C's of digestion. But one of the steps we had to teach this person is that they need to start connecting to their food, because believe it or not, digestion actually starts in the mind, right? And so if we don't connect to our food in a way where our mind starts preparing the rest of the body for food to come in, then certain things don't take place. And like I said, if we skip a step, every other step after suffers. So one of the steps when we connect to our food through our senses, right, is that the more you smell in the aroma of your food, pay attention to the colors and the textures and taste it as you're cooking it, what happens is you'll notice that you build up a whole bunch of saliva waiting for this food to finish. And when you do that, that tells you that you've already primed the very first part of your digestive system that's going to take care of your food when your food enters your mouth. And that's important because that saliva tells us something. The saliva tells us that our gut has got the message from our brain and has started making digestive enzymes that exist in our mouth. And that saliva is just the vehicle to get those enzymes onto the food, right? So what we have to ask is, when's the last time you ever ate where you had saliva started, like almost like a dog would drool, but saliva started to being produced into your mouth so that you can break down that food properly, enzymatically, not just with your teeth, but with those enzymes when the food hits your mouth. And most people have never had that experience. And so obviously they're going to have all these other problems afterwards. Okay. So we also taught him how to build resilience to stress. We had to teach him how to develop more restful sleep. And we had to work on mindset, self-love strategies that would help him develop a growth mindset. And the third thing we did was action what we learned off the testing, and then we retested. So I'm actually going to share with you his test results. Okay. And when we share those test results, what we're going to be able to do is see exactly what was uncovered that nobody else looked for and nobody else bothered investigating for 16 years. Okay, so here's his first lab test. Now this is 3 different segments of one test. This test is gives us about 4 pages of information like this. Okay, and these are just snapshots of different sections on one test. So if you look here, what this talks about is his normal bacterial flora. Okay, and what you see here is everything's on the low side. So something, your gut, like the nickname we like to give the gut is the tube of life. And if your bacteria can't grow there, that's a problem, because they are a life form that needs to exist there. And so the first question that comes up is, what is actually not allowing the life to take place in that gut, in that tube? And so look at what was happening. He's got barely any bacteria at sufficient levels, right? And then when we go down here, we see overgrowth of bacteria, and these are called opportunistic bacteria, bugs that when they have the right opportunity, like these guys not being there, because these are your protective bacteria. These are the guys that make you healthy, and he's got barely any of them. So then what happens is these guys will take that opportunity and they'll take it as, well, there's a lot of this space that's open for me to grow. I'm going to take over because they're invasive, right? So he had this species of Morganella, which was really overgrown. And one of the things that this connects to is it can cause a lot of inflammation. Systemically, it doesn't even have to be in the gut. It can cause it anywhere because it creates a lot of histamine, right? And think of when someone gets allergies, what's happening to their faces. What do they take? They take an antihistamine, right? To resolve that swelling and all that inflammation. Now over here, this is where we learned a lot. Remember, no one had done a proper test. Not that he didn't have a stool test done. He had lots of stool tests done. He had colonoscopies, the whole gamut. But no one did something like this where they would actually learn something. So right away, what we see is he still was bleeding microscopic blood into his stool, right? The limit here is 10, he had 17. So he's got blood dripping into his stool, which is not a good thing. His immune system was on overdrive, probably trying to fight off all these bacteria that are all imbalanced, right? He's got a reaction to gluten here that's very close to being marked high. That's high enough. We don't need to see it in red to action it. And then he had this marker here for gut inflammation. Now, this is a very specific marker. Remember, he was diagnosed with IBS. Here's the thing. This marker never goes up if you have IBS. It goes up if you have Crohn's or colitis. And look at his marker. So he's at over 1,000 and the limit is 173. Right? This is astronomically high, actually so high that the first thing you would be worried about is if he has cancer. And this was never tested for 16 years. And then this last marker here shows us that he's got a condition called leaky gut. Now, what that means is that things he's eating or bacteria that's running through his gut are getting into his bloodstream when they're not supposed to. And hence we call it leaky. So your gut is this barrier, has this barrier. So the tube doesn't want things to get into your bloodstream. So it keeps the cells tightly packed so that nothing can get in or out of the gut. Okay. And so his was allowing all these things to get into his bloodstream. Then his immune system has to deal with this. And this is actually the basis of any autoimmune condition. Okay. And guess what Crohn's and colitis are? They're autoimmune conditions. And guess what happens if you go to a gastroenterologist and you have this? They say, we can't fix these problems. There's no cure, right? But the problem is that's the farthest thing from the truth. There's no cure in terms of a one approach that works for everyone as a silver bullet, but this case will be evidence. So what we did is we put him on a protocol, right? And that was very specific to what was going on with him. And like I mentioned, we had all these lifestyle changes that we had to implement because that's the foundation. You have to teach people how to get health or how to build health within their own home. And here's the testing post, right? So we went through this protocol, different protocols, and look what happened. This looks much more balanced. This is his normal bacteria. Now only 2 of them are low. Okay. We look here, Morganella is gone. Doesn't even show up anymore. There's no numbers for it. Looks much more balanced. Okay. Now look at here. Blood, 0. It's no more microscopic blood in his stool. His immune system, the range is 510 to 2000, right smack dab in the middle where we want it to be. His response to gluten has dropped down significantly. Now look at his inflammation that was, 10 times the limit that my first worry was, is this individual have cancer in his bowels, down to 14, right? His leaky gut marker below the range, now gone back to normal. And so what happens in this individual's life, if you can achieve this, is that all his symptoms of pain, cramping, bloating, uncontrolled bowel movements, gone. And now, believe it or not, this is in the span of 4 months, right? Took him 4 months to achieve this. His energy levels dramatically improved, and so did his business because his productivity increased. All the foods that he thought he had allergies to, all of a sudden, weren't causing problems. His brain fog was gone. And one of the things that always scared him is when he would see blood in the toilet or see black stool, right? And that all normalized. He was starting to have normal number of bowel movements, normal consistency. And so what we have to remember is the level of your health will always set the ceiling for your life, right? It directly impacts everything. It directly impacts your ability to earn an income, because if you don't feel good, you don't work well, right? And you're not going to put in the extra hours or the extra schooling to learn new stuff to go up a level in your life, right? So no matter where we go, your health sets that ceiling, and you can only set it as high as you can or as low as you want. So this was a testimonial that Mr. C left. And what he says is, this approach doesn't have any comparison to anything I knew was possible. There's a big difference between functional medicine and modern medicine. Functional medicine is the way all doctors should practice, from understanding the body to digging deep to find the root causes of one or more complex illnesses, to doing the right test to get the right answers. Over the years, so I've learned so much more than I would ever have imagined I would have about my body and my mind and how they work together. This is one big rabbit hole. For anyone in the same position I was in, it's never too late to change the way you feel about yourself in any aspect of your life. Feeling the way you feel right now is not a healthy way to live physically or mentally. It's not going to be easy, but I guarantee it'll be worth it in the end. So he overcame and did exactly what Chris did, the impossible. These are illnesses that anyone who's diagnosed with them will be told, you can't cure this, right? The scary part of autoimmune diseases is that the best solution our medical system has is to turn your immune system off with specific drugs. Now, ask me what happens if you turn your immune system off and then you get sick. Most people find it very hard to recover. Ask me what happens long-term when you have all these people, remember 50% of our population suffering from one chronic disease or another, right? And likely a lot of them are on these immunosuppressant medications. So what happens to them long-term? What's the one thing that's built into our immune system that keeps certain types of cells in check? Is our immune system will attack and kill off cancerous cells. And so if we're constantly turning that function off because we think our immune system's the problem, instead, actually, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, right? What happens is you get more cases of cancer. And these are all illnesses that everyone panics and lives in total fear of. Like, I got a message from someone today who's like, I'm just afraid of getting cancer. I'm like, then like that mindset has to shift, right? But these aren't illnesses that aren't overcomable. Like, everything can change. If one, you believe you can change it and you refuse to believe, it's impossible. So this is how we implement. This is how we take someone through this process. I'm just going to take a look at time. So we're actually doing pretty good in time because I want to leave some time for question and answer. So what I did is I brought some gifts, which is kind of fitting because of the time of the year. But what I wanted to do, Chris, for your community, and I know like we don't have a lot of people on this call. I think there's had a couple people join in here. But what I wanted to do was just present an opportunity to anyone who wants to take it up, knowing what you were able to achieve and how much of a instrumental tool you are for so many people in your community. What I did was I came up with this, which would help people kind of claim the life that they deserve. And so typically we have a 30-minute metabolic assessment that we do with people who are interested in just seeing what they can uncover. What are the things that are kind of keeping their health held hostage? And so in this appointment, you would pre-fill out what we call a metabolic assessment form, which is about 4 or 5 pages of questions. Actually, it's much longer than that. It's about 360 different questions in it. But what you're going to do is you fill those out and you send them to us. I get to review them before we meet. And then we have a discussion. I teach you what we're able to learn. And so what you typically find is that there might be a lot of things there that need to be talked about or addressed or talked about in a manner where you need to plan around these things, or not, right? But the whole point is like, let's figure out what's going on in the background that's not on your level of awareness yet, because you might not even recognize these symptoms. And normally for that appointment, it costs $147. But for anyone who's in your community or who's watching this, you can take advantage of this for just $47. I took $100 off of that cost. And so we can talk about that when we do like a Q&A or just open it up to conversation. Someone raised their hand. Go ahead. I think I unmuted you, so go ahead. I think it was Tam, or it might be you, Chris. Allow to talk. No? Okay, I'll come back to that then. The other thing I did was I created a free video series that has basically, if you want to register for this, what will happen is, and you can take a screenshot of this where you can get the address down here. And same thing here, you can take a screenshot of this that allows you to book that, or else you can just email me. I'll share my email address as well. But what happens is this, when you sign up for this, every day you'll get a video for 25 days. And they're just things that you can change in your life to make your life better, to improve your health. And that is, for some people, that's what they need to go through first before they realize how much power they have in their life to change. Okay, so these are my gifts to your community. I really hope that we have some people take me up on these offers, because I think there's a lot of value to be learned and gained through this process. So to kind of finish off, Chris, we'll open it up to a question and answer. I think everyone has the ability to speak through this process now. So just shoot. I'm here to serve. I'm here to answer your questions. I'm sure there's something that came up, or some curiosity, or just maybe even a personal question someone wants to ask.